couple years back, I started gaining a little bit of infamy as being that guy on the internet with those ads saying, "Hey, stop playing scales, bro." And looking back on all that, I can confidently say I still stand by it 100%. Because if you don't know by now, the purpose of that messaging was just to tell you to stop playing scales in a manner that doesn't actually translate into music. Because learning a scale is one thing, and playing a scale is another thing. But actually using a scale, that's a whole other thing entirely. You want to think of a scale on its own as musical information, right? It's about what you do with that information. How you convey that information is where the actual music happens. So learning a scale doesn't automatically make you some kind of musical wizard. So a scale is essentially a tool, and if you're not someone who knows how to operate those tools, then they don't really do you any good. So in this video, I'm going to show you a simple concept that's going to be your foot in the door on how to actually use scales for your own musical gain. By the way, make sure you stick around for the end of this lesson because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that you are going to love. And we're going to take, for example, the king of all scales, which is the major scale. So in the very beginning, when I was playing over that G major backing track, I was staying within the bounds of the G major scale. But the way I was actually approaching it on the fretboard, which is what I'm about to show you, is actually putting you in a position to be less likely to just noodle up and down the scale without any kind of deliberation on what you're doing with those notes. Now that's not to say there isn't a time and place for just running up a scale or down a scale, if it really fits and flows with the overall musical idea, especially when we're talking about like shred guitar. That's like a really like an important part of it is being able to go up and down the scales and go up and down those arpeggios and stuff. But if that's all you can do and you don't actually know how to just sit and take your time with the notes, really what you're doing is you're just blowing past a lot of very important potential for musical expression. And my personal approach, as well as the approach that I teach with, has always been just slowing down, taking your time, and really getting to know the notes one by one. Because if you can figure that out playing slow, then it's only a matter of time before you're able to do the same thing, only faster. Okay, so back to the G major scale, right? What I was doing was not soloing using the framework of the scale like in one position like this. What I was doing was I was actually following it along kind of like a little bit more in a linear way, just one string at a time, particularly three strings, the D, G, and B strings. And the reason for that is this. What I was doing was I was finding three specific notes within the major scale as like kind of a focal point, all right? Now, if you don't already know, within a major scale, there are three notes contained within that actually outline the G major chord. It's what's called a triad, right? And it's found right here. I'll just show you. Right here on the 5th fret of the D string, that's for the first note. Then we have 4th fret of the G string, and then 3rd fret of the B string. That's our little G major triad right here. And if you take a look, right, it's all contained within that scale pattern. It's just isolating those three specific notes. And those happen to outline a G major chord, right? The three notes in a triad are the minimum amount of notes needed in order to create an actual chord. When you're targeting the notes in the actual chord, it makes sense that they'll sound good in that particular key. So if I'm working with this G major scale, instead of just sitting there and then just kind of ascending and descending and just trying to land a note that sounds good to me, right? I'm just going to start with the notes in the triad, and then I'm actually going to expand the scale on each individual string, the D, G, and B strings, because that's where these notes in the triad are. Now, of course, you can find notes in a G major triad elsewhere, right? And on multiple strings and stuff, but we're just going to use these particular three strings, as our example today, particularly because, this is kind of where, like in lead guitar, this is sort of where the leads tend to lie on these higher strings. So starting with this note right here, the 5th fret of the D string, this is actually a G note. So this is a root note, which is of course the fundamental note, that the anchor point that lets you know that this is the key of G, or this is a G chord we're playing, right? The next note here, which is a B, is the major third. Okay, so we have our root or our 1, we have our third, our 3, right? And then on the 3rd fret here of the B string, we have our 5th, and that's a D. So with these notes, G, B, and D, we actually form a G major chord. Remember, they're all contained within that G major scale pattern, right? And just the G major scale in general. So these three are kind of our little home bases. So you may already be used to just targeting the root note, which is a great safety net. You know, it's a great way to fall back on just knowing that you're going to hit the right note. Because if you're playing in the key of G or over a G chord, especially when you play a G note, it's just 100% always going to sound good. But sometimes you want to diversify, right? If you want to really be expressive musically, you got to really get to know what all the notes can do for you in a scale. So we're going to start with these three because these three are kind of pretty much guaranteed to help us sound good. So check this out. I'm going to be playing the G major scale, starting on the D string, on the 5th fret here, on this G note. You know, just for reference, right? We're going to just visualize the fretboard in this way for this particular concept we're going over. So when we play the scale, let's just take it about there. We don't have to play the entire scale. We just want to cover just a decent amount of ground on the fretboard. So we have 5th fret, 7th fret, 9th fret, 10th fret, 12th fret. Then if we were to go up the scale, let's say up to the 12th fret, or, you know, on the G string, starting on the 3rd here, which is the 4th fret, we're going to play 4th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 9th fret, 11th fret, and 12th fret, right? You can hear the G major scaleness happening, right? And then doing the same thing, just finding the scale using the, starting on the 5th here, which is the 3rd fret of the B string. So that is more than enough musical content for us to mess with. I mean, really, just even with these three notes, we could craft a solo if we wanted to, but, you know, just to make it interesting, we're going to expand it a little bit further. So check this out. If I were to start a musical phrase, so let's say you know how to play something like the G major scale, but you don't really know how to make it musical. You don't know how to create a phrase, or you feel like you have to ask yourself permission, like, what do I play first, right? Which is a totally like common approach when especially when you're getting used to the concept of improvising, right? Because a lot of times we can be really harsh on ourselves and think that whatever we come up with isn't going to sound good. But you really want to quiet that voice a little bit and just take the time to experiment. Because that's the great thing about just being at home, practicing and experimenting and just trying to find out what works. And then if you find something that works, you save that for later, right? And then eventually you start storing all of these things that you've worked out by yourself so that when you're in an actual musical situation, whether it's you recording something at home or recording a video of yourself or even going out and jamming with other musicians, you can bring to bear all of the stuff that you've already worked out and you know that actually works. So consider this one of those similar kind of situations, you know, to put yourself in. So if we were to create a phrase, and let's say we're starting on the root note, you're going to notice that with each note that we start on, it kind of sets up a different context of the melody, right? So if we start on the root note, you know, starting on that root note, it kind of sets up like the following notes, and I'm going to try not to, you know, just play up and down the scale, right? We don't want to do the same exact thing we were doing with a regular scale pattern just on, you know, on one string because it's the same scale. We can try and just hitting notes kind of in a random sort of pattern. Or if we move kind of in a linear way, it's got to be a little more deliberate, right? So if we were to do something like this, like that, that's a pretty line right there. Super simple. Starting on the root, just kind of wants to take us there. So, okay, that's a cool little line. So if I'm playing kind of an emotional ballad-like, you know, type of song, or if I'm playing over a song like that, like I was in the beginning of the video, backing track like that, that's a perfectly viable lick. That'll totally work. And then I can even bring it back down. Resolve it. So that root note, like I said, it set us up for this melody because it just got me thinking like, okay, that's the note we're starting on. I kind of feel like it's going to go in this direction. And you'll see why this is important as far as what note we're starting on, right? And this is a great way to kind of find out what your ear tends to hear when you're trying this yourself, because you do have an inner musician, right? That's there, that, you know, was built over years and years of just loving music and listening to music. So whether you think you have musical skill or talent or not, your inner musician is just there by virtue of your connection to music. And so you can tap into that by kind of letting it sort of tell you, and it's not going to sound perfect at first, but just letting yourself find that out and discover that process, right? The discovery is really where a lot of the fun is. So That's kind of how it felt, you know, go. And then I can go like something like that, just making that root note the home bass. So I'm messing around with, you know, the notes in the G major scale that we you know, were kind of giving ourselves, you know, on this string. And it's all just like bringing us back down to that root note. So that's giving us a certain sort of style of phrase. Hey, by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It'll really help us out, and it'll let us know that you're actually liking these lessons and you want us to keep bringing you more. So thanks in advance, and now back to the lesson. Now let's try here on the G string, starting on the third. So we're not starting on the root note anymore. So if we start on the third, gives us a slightly different sound when we, you know, let the third be our new home bass, right? So we're focusing on that particular chord tone, as it's called, and it's setting us up for a different kind of sounding melody, right? Remember, the root note was more like, and then if we start on the third, you can kind of hear the harmony happening, right? Right? It's like if it was an upper third, you know, if you were to harmonize it in the upper third, I mean, there you go, by the way. Like, that's kind of how it's done. Just starting on the third, where the other singer or guitar player or instrumentalist, whatever, would start on the root. The harmonizer would start on the third, typically. So it gives us a different, even if we played the same movement of melody, it still sounded a little different. Like this. Sounds different from this. Different kind of phrase, right? Different texture, whatever you want to call it. And so let's keep going. It's sounding a lot different, right? Now keep in mind, we're still playing the G major scale. Like I said, it's what it's meant to do is just starting on that particular note is jogging new ideas. Because if we always are starting on the root note, habits are going to set in and they're going to take us in a certain direction that we're going to get bored of, you know? So, but it's not the scale's fault that our playing is boring, to be frank. It's just the fact that we don't have enough ideas. So these are meant to help you jog new ideas. So let's try this on the fifth now, right? Very different. Same G major scale. And bear in mind, we're running into all the notes in the scale, including the third and the fifth, even if that's not our starting, or the third and the root, let's say, even though we're starting on the fifth. It's really about trying to start and end on the fifth, just as our kind of parameters, right? So that we can jog new ideas, as I said. Like right there's a root note, right? So we're gonna run into those notes, but again, we're gonna focus on starting and ending on these particular chord tones here. So if we're on the B string, we're gonna start and end on the fifth. If we're on the G string, we're gonna start and end on the third. And then if we're on the D string, we're gonna start and end on the root, on the first, right? So that's what I want you to do in the beginning. Just focus on them one string at a time. You know, and try to use your ear to navigate, like if you stumble on a wrong note, or, you know, a note outside of the G major scale, like, oop. You know, it may not necessarily be like, you know, incorrect melodically, and you might stumble on something that sounds cool, but just try to focus on staying within the parameters of the G major scale. And if you need help with that, just think do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? Adapt it to the key that you're in, and that'll help you find, you know, that you know, you're playing the right notes instead of accidentally playing some other mode or something. Now, after you spend some time with each string individually, you can start weaving them together. So you can, you know, start, let's say, on the root note, and let's say you want to end on the fifth, but you want to just by way of just going up the strings, making your way down. it becomes kind of a fun little game where you're just like, you're starting and stopping. It's like you have point A and point B, and you can find creative ways to get from one point to the other, you know? So if we were to start on the root note and then end on the fifth, maybe it'll sound something like this. And now let's say we start on the third and then end on the root. You know, and we can start to create a flow, a movement, you know, between the strings as we're weaving through this scale and just thinking about those starting and stopping points. So we've essentially tripled our home base. So, you know, we normally would have our root note as home base, but since we're playing it safe, you know, sticking with G major, we're playing in the key of G major. You can use a backing track like I used in the beginning of the video, or any G major backing track that you find on YouTube, and just experiment with this. But make sure your main focus is to start and end on a chord tone, either the root, the third, or the fifth. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw that backing track back on, and I'm just going to play some simple melodic phrasing, focusing on those chord tones. And what I challenge you to do is follow along. See where I start and stop, you know, with given phrases. And just know that that's exactly what I'm wanting you to do. It doesn't have to be something complicated. The whole point of playing the scale one string at a time, in the beginning at least, or just, you know, kind of moving it more linearly than just up and down a particular pattern, is to prevent the likelihood that you're going to just be noodling and going through the motions. This is kind of a way to keep you more on your toes and make sure you're hitting the right notes, and it's going to actually kind of force you to come up with more interesting ideas. So that's just to show you how by learning a scale and kind of setting it up in a certain way, you can force yourself to actually use the scale, think about what you're doing, think about the melody, right? And not really get caught up in the trap of just ascending and descending over and over again. And if you start practicing this, I promise you, you're gonna have a much better idea of actually how to use the scale and extract the music out of it rather than just recite the information. And by the way, this whole concept is not just limited to the major scale. I mean, the major scale being the king of all scales, the most important scale, right? Every scale that's derived from the major scale can also follow this same thing. And what you can start to do over time is blend that approach of improvising with the scale in this particular way by focusing on, you know, starting and landing on the chord tones. And you can even start combining that with, let's say, your go-to pentatonic licks, right? So if you want to play like major pentatonic licks alongside, you know, what we just went over, that could totally work too. And now you finally have your foot in the door to letting your solos actually sound musical instead of just sounding like scales. This is an excellent starting point for you to finally start playing guitar the way you've always wanted to. You're actually now in the perfect spot to expand further on what we've covered today and actually take it to a level beyond anything that you've experienced so far. And it all has to do with that free gift I was telling you about. Remember that? Well, here it is. This bad boy right here is the fretboard conveyor belt. This is a system that I've developed that's already helped thousands and thousands of guitar players online learn how to navigate the fretboard comfortably and confidently the way you should. You know what I mean? So be sure to click here to claim your copy or check that link in the description box. I still consider this to be a noble endeavor, and I appreciate you taking the time to actually learn how this concept can enrich your own playing.